And you, and you, and you, and you were there. Some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful.
Hello.
Hey, Bryan.
Happy 4th of July.
Yes,
America.
sir. Yes, I'm about to sit down after this, and I'm going to have my annual rewatching of Jaws, which is one of my favorite movies. So
excellent. Yeah, you can also tune in and because this is America, I saw that Joey Chestnut won the Nathan's hot dog eating contest. I think for the 15th time in a row. And there was some 22-year-old kid who opened fire on a 4th of July parade in Chicago and killed 6 people. So America.
I saw that. Yeah.
America.
Yeah.
Should I stand now and break into song, or so I don't know?
Well, the way I celebrate the 4th of July is let's think about what we've done right, what we've done wrong, and make every next step better. That's how I celebrate the 4th. And it was a bad one this year. It was a bad one. So,
and the last good when was the last good one? I'm trying to recall when that was.
I had a really great one where the Cub Scout pack I was Cub Master for. We led the little parade and we helped set up, and we did all kinds of stuff. And that was several years back. So that was a good one. And I like to reflect on the things we've gotten right. And sometimes it's hard to think about that. I mean, sometimes it's hard to find them, but
yes, it sounds like you are perhaps in a better frame of mind than I am at present, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's all right. It's hey man, that's why they make butter pecan ice cream. Everybody's got different tastes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, welcome to Dream Idiots, folks. This is our weekly deep dive into random stupidity that we present to you and to each other for our own amusement, and hopefully you like as well.
Yes, sir. And we appreciate the feedback we've gotten. My favorite one recently was someone commented, "I like this podcast, but I don't know why." And hey, same here. We're in the same boat. Yeah. So
yeah, we're with you.
All right.
Yeah.
So I think you're going first.
I'm going first. I was just going to say, do those things, the liking and the subscribing and the sharing. And if you want to give us a review and make some random comment, please do so, but give us 5 stars. That would be wildly appreciated on whatever platform you're listening on.
Yes, indeedly doodly.
And I'm going first. I was going to offer up a super brief update, only because it's kind of a little bit hot off the press, and I think you may have seen this as well. Episode 22, we talked about the Austin love triangle, and that
that's right,
absolutely bonkers case. I don't. Part of me doesn't want to give this any real time because it's just a basic love triangle, gun violence, stupidity story. I mean, I'm really tired of stories in the news where someone with absolutely no foresight whatsoever engages in gun violence, and then there's a case where someone in a Subway restaurant opened fire because he had too much mayo and killed someone. Yeah. I mean, the Austin love triangle. So Caitlin Armstrong is a woman in Austin. She had a boyfriend. The boyfriend was texting with this woman named Mariah Wilson, and she got pissed off, and Mariah Wilson is now dead. Caitlin Armstrong goes on the lam from Austin, flies to New York, flies out of Newark. Eventually, it turns out, end of last week, she travels out of the country on a illegal, basically forged passport to Costa Rica. She's arrested. She's coming back home. She's going to stand trial. She's going to spend the rest of her life in jail. So, America.
That's the way the cookie bounces, Bryan.
Right.
Well, I'm glad she's been corralled, and Costa Rica was a surprise. I always figured she was going to Europe, but that's why I'm not a police person. So
yeah. So anyway, bye, Caitlin. Have a nice time. And so I also go into what I was going to talk about this week, and some of this might be, a little hard to make terribly amusing, but it kind of is the elephant in the room on a certain level, at least in my mind. Roe v. Wade is going away, has gone away, maybe forever. I don't really know what to think of any of this. As a straight white male in his 50s, this isn't really going to affect me directly, perhaps a whole bunch, but it certainly devastating to society and to culture, and it's hateful and it's misogynistic and it's backwards thinking, and it's taking us back to, I don't know, the 17th century, and at least in my view. And I think there's a lot of incredibly compelling evidence that Republicans in general, and those that are now sitting on the Supreme Court, basically don't really give a shit about dead babies. This is nothing that's nothing to do with babies at all. This has to do, in my view, has everything to do with racism. So there's a guy back in 1987, this guy Ben Wattenberg, and you may have seen a little bit about this guy again recently because he's come up in the news because of all the anger over the Supreme Court and Roe v. Wade. This guy was a Democrat. He was an advisor to LBJ, and so he was a big name in the Democratic Party for a very long period of time. And he wrote a book, came out in 87, called The Birth Dearth. Have you heard this argument at all?
I have not.
Okay. So, I mean, this is a direct quote from this man's book. Quote, "The major problem confronting the United States today is there aren't enough white babies being born."
I have heard this argument. I just didn't hear it called the birth dearth. Okay. All right.
If we don't do something about this and do it now, white people in this numerical minority will be no longer a. I'm sorry. I'm mangling this quote. If we don't do something about this and do it now, white people will be in the numerical minority and will no longer be a white man's land. So, people freaked out then. They're freaking out now again over this quote and this perception that all of this is just thinly veiled racism. I think there's a compelling argument to be made. This is exactly what, why those on the far right are doing this. Wattenberg went a step further in his book to basically say that there are three potential solutions to this no longer being a white man's land. The first, you could pay American women, current citizens of America, you could pay them to have babies. Well, this problem doesn't make any damn sense because you can't then have a law that says we're only going to pay the white moms. Okay, so that's there's no way that's going to become law. The second potential option that he said may have been a possibility but untenable from a legal standpoint was you could at the time modify or increase our immigration quotas. You have the same problem. People that are coming to or trying to come to America from anywhere else in the world, the vast majority of these people, guess what? They're not coming from Ireland or Germany. They're coming from sub-Saharan Africa. They're coming from Mexico and Central America, and exactly. So again, I'm sure 2/3 at a minimum are black and brown folks that this guy view as absolutely second-class citizens. And then he writes in this book, the third thing we can do is remember that 60% of fetuses that are aborted every year are white. If we could keep that 60% of life alive, that would solve our birth dearth.
Solving it as though it were an algebra equation, as opposed to a devastating. Okay.
Right. So, solving it as if it's a problem. I mean, so again, this is a classic example of someone who is in no way qualified from a sociological, medical, anthropological standpoint to be addressing these issues. Anyone in those fields who weighed in on this would say, guess what, folks? We can show you on every single level you want that diversity is the critical component to health, longevity, and well-being, right? That's demonstrably true in every stage of life. And cultures that seek to have eugenics or homogeny always crumble and fail. But this guy decided, it was his opinion that Western civilization was in his mind clearly superior, obviously, and that all other cultures were inferior. And so this was his solution to his problem was, but had nothing to do with giving a rat's ass about women having children that were unplanned or unwanted. If they're white and they're being born, that's all we give a shit about, because that will help sustain our status, our culture, etc. And so America is a racist country, folks. You just really, I think it's critical the folks understand that this has nothing at all to do with saving babies. If it had anything to do with saving babies, Republicans would be up in arms about the fact that there were, I think, 17 babies in Uvalde who were gunned down less than a month ago. And if you need any more compelling evidence than that, I don't know how to help you. I mean, it's just nakedly clear in my mind what's going on here, and people are still pretending as if it's the problem lies elsewhere. And I just can't really wrap my brain around it.
I can't either. And also, I think, I mean, to the point where, again, we're two white guys in our 50s discussing this, something that doesn't affect us, but I mean, directly affect us in that sense. But it's this whole idea that coming from this perspective of less government in people's lives, unless it's the most personal, private area and arena that you can possibly imagine, then, have at it. Have at it. Restrict as much as you want, make this illegal, do whatever you can to do, because freedom, because it's choice. I don't understand it. I don't understand the reasoning behind it. And I think that it is such an intrusive, immoral overreach into women's very personal and private decisions.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think,
undeniably.
And I think the connection,
somehow they deny it. Right.
And I think this connection you made between this and the whole, because this is basically the white replacement theory that we're hearing from the right, like Tucker Carlson and folks like that. We're being replaced. And then what do you hear in the
good?
What do you hear in the chants at Charlotte at the Unite the Right rally? You will not replace us, although they're not saying the word "you," right? I mean, they're not going to replace us. Right. And it's not a matter of. It's one of these things where I look at. There's a great film by John Sayles called Lone Star from 1995. Mm-hmm. Do you remember that? Chris Cooper, yeah. Elizabeth Pena. Great film about race and relationships in Texas in the border, and there's this one character who says, "I don't mind it when our cultures mix with food and music and all that. That's great. But when you're talking about history and who controls history, that's something different." And it really isn't. I mean, if we're going to have a democracy, we've got to approach it in a way that acknowledges that, hey, you know what? A lot of horrible shit's been done in our name. And by our name, I mean people that look like you and me.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And
the McCulloughs and the O'Hurleys and the Wellingtons, but not really so much the Rincones and the Garcias. Like, okay.
Well, think about the way the Irish were treated.
Oh, right.
Right. For a long time, the Irish were
Mexican.
and then it was the Chinese. And you societies, if they get too big, they will always have to look for a scapegoat of some type.
Right. And
in this case, it's women because they did what? I don't understand.
Right.
And the other part I would like to add is just this idea that we will have this baby delivered no matter what, apparently at the cost of the woman's life in some cases, mm-hmm. apparently at the cost of her choice as to a woman who was assaulted by a man, and this child as a result of physical violence, a violent act of rape.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, once that baby's born, yeah, there you go. Okay, we're done. Yeah, our job is done. The baby's here.
Right. Have a nice life.
Yeah. And now, little baby, you pick yourself up by your bootstraps, even though you can't walk yet. You go and do that. And
and by the way, since you're black and brown, we're not really going to do much in the way of helping you get an education, and we're not really going to do much. If you do manage to get all the way through a primary education, we're not going to help you with higher education whatsoever, because let's face it, you're black or brown, and so you're the die has been cast here. And so if you're black and brown, it is virtually assured that you will be working in some sort of less than task, menial tasks, food service, something that is menial because that's all you're capable of or really deserving of. But you should really be appreciative of us that we helped ensure your birth.
And heaven forbid you form unions to protect your rights as a worker.
Right. Oh yeah, of course.
Of course.
Well, Jesus hates unions. Remember that. That's in Corinthians, I think, right?
Heaven forbid that we have a system that doesn't believe that corporations are citizens, yet should have all the rights of a citizens, but none of the responsibility. No,
right.
Screw that. I mean, it's just, wow.
Yeah. Just despicable on in so many different ways. The further thing that I'm just sort of dying to wrap my brain around, this was rolled out pre Roe v. Wade being repealed, was that in Texas, our delightful, horrible piece of shit governor passed that law that basically said that if you are aware of someone, I mean, if you're a rideshare driver, you're at risk of facing a $10,000 fine. If you pick up someone, you take them to a Planned Parenthood facility, you are at risk of a fine or criminal action if you're a doctor or a nurse practitioner, or perhaps if you even give, I mean, if I wrote a check for $100 to Planned Parenthood, am I now then criminally exposed because I helped and get, whatever that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now Roe v. Wade has been yanked completely. There are all these folks that are now kind of in the very, very short term, and this is July 4th when we're recording this. Let's come out on July 5th. It feels like there are a whole bunch of folks kind of treading water, not really knowing what to do, how to proceed, if to proceed, because if you look at the websites of various nonprofits and organizations in this area, I looked at 3 or 4. They have just a blanket disclaimer that basically says, we have no idea what we're doing. We're in a holding pattern. What I'm dying to know is, for some reason, the euphemism for getting an abortion is camping. So people are talking about if you need to go camping in Colorado or New Mexico and you live in Texas, I'm happy to help you facilitate a camping trip, right? And so that's a terrible euphemism for an abortion. But there is now the threat of if I, Bryan Treat in Austin, Texas, chose to take someone I know or a complete citizen to Ruidoso, am I now liable? Okay, let's say I owned a property in Ruidoso and I gave that person, residency in that property and they became a resident of the state of New Mexico. Is it still a crime? I don't know.
States' rights, baby. Wait, what?
Yeah, right.
Right. I mean, seriously, it's.
And because it's also apparently the case, they will next be coming for contraception, because it's all God's will, right? So life begins at conception. So contraception is obviously contrary to God's will. So condoms go away, birth control go away, IUDs go away, all those things go away. Is getting a vasectomy okay? Is getting a hysterectomy okay? Is it a crime? I would advocate, and actually my father, who passed away 22 years ago, I remember him saying when I was literally a child that any woman who wanted to get a hysterectomy should be allowed to get a hysterectomy at no cost to herself and be paid $10,000 by the federal government to do it. But wow, that's an interesting argument in light of Roe v. Wade going away. So there's some compelling things there. And should vasectomies be free? I would say absolutely. We're trying to avoid unwanted pregnancies. So yes. So I think it's the case. Most insurance companies will pay for vasectomies. The VA, should pay any man who wants a vasectomy $1,000 and cover the cost of the procedure.
And your ride home and the bag of frozen peas
right.
you'll be putting on.
Here's a bag you can sit on. Have a nice life. But anyway, these right-wing fuckers are they love Jesus very much, but they don't love you, and they're coming. They're not coming; they're here. So what else is going to go away?
No, and it's just I never thought we would see this in our lifetime.
No, yeah, it's disturbing at the very least.
I'm looking at young women like I have a couple of nieces, and I'm looking at women who are in their 20s, and my nieces, what what are we saying to the women? It's not about it. She's somebody's niece. She's somebody's sister who's being affected. It's like she's a person first and foremost before she's anything else.
Right.
What are we doing? And why are we doing it continually again and again and again and again? So, yeah, I think you were right earlier when you said it. And to paraphrase the great philosopher David Cross, not that funny a topic, Brian. Not that funny.
I'm dying up here. Anyway, yeah, sorry. It was kind of hard to get motivated to talk about something really silly for me. Just too much black cloud karma for me this week. You and everybody else in Austin, you're in the heart of the storm. So yes. It's clear that I will not die in Texas. It's clear I will one day be somewhere else. So anyway, sorry folks, that was not maybe as random and silly as we sometimes try to be. Most of the time try to be, but it seemed at least worth chatting about.
Do we have a curse word of the week to cleanse the
we
palate?
do. We will shift gears into something that is so before we can change speeds here before we go back to we're going back to China-Burma-India, yes? For part 3? Yes,
for part 3 is my story.
Excellent.
Yep.
So the curse word, we do in fact have a curse word of the week. If you allow me to have some technical difficulties here with my computer, here we go.
It is time for the Dream Idiots curse word of the week.
And so this week, this word is slightly related, but this is a curse word that I always thought was sort of funny, and it turns out I was a little bit wrong with the actual definition.
Casper Milquetoast. A timid person, a shy coward, from the old comic strip character Casper Milquetoast.
So Casper Milquetoast is from a 1920s cartoon. And milquetoast for some reason is spelled M-I-L-Q-U-E.
Yeah.
It's like, that's M-I-L-Q-U-E is not how you spell milk. I don't get it. So someone who's milquetoast or Casper Milquetoast is someone who is feeble. It's like namby-pamby, sort of, right? Just wishy-washy, just bland, right? But I was literally always convinced that if you were a Casper Milquetoast, that somehow it was a code word for someone who is bland, but also it was like a racist code word because it's Casper is white, milk is white, toast is white. I thought it was white. I was convinced that it was a bland person who was racist when I was like a kid.
Huh.
And then if you Google those terms, that doesn't come up at all. So I made it up. So if you call someone a Casper Milquetoast, you're not saying that they're racist, just that they're boring.
I think of Milquetoast because I never heard it Casper Milquetoast. I've always heard just Milquetoast with no Casper in front of it. Because I think Casper, I think the friendly ghost.
Right.
And then I think
right.
Casper,
right. That's what I thought. Right.
And your second thought is Casper Weinberger, right? So worlds apart, those two. But was it a cartoon, like an animated cartoon, or like a comic strip?
It was a comic. It was a comic strip. I think a comic strip in the 20s, so it wouldn't have been. That's too early. That was in like Warner Brothers. That's in like a Bugs Bunny. Right.
Yeah, Steamboat Willie was, I think, 27.
Yeah, so I think comic book.
So it would be a comic strip then.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Casper Milk. I'll have to look that up because I didn't know that was based on a comic strip. And I mean, if there's anybody who should have known that, it was probably me. But
dork.
Being comic book geek that I am.
Right.
And I didn't know the Casper part either. I'd always heard that one. This one totally has me flummoxed.
Right.
I'd never heard that before.
Well, apparently you and me both.
All right.
It's not a code word for the clan members use to talk to each other or anything.
Or like the Goodfellas and Goodfellas. You'll like him. He's a good fella. Yeah. Okay. So are we ready to go back to China, Burma, and India one last time, Brian, for part 3?
I'm ready. Hit me.
Okay. So I was going to tell you that originally this story was going to be about a person called Fletcher Hanks. And instead, this story became about someone named Fletcher Hanks. By that, I mean Fletcher Hanks Sr. and Jr. I was going to do a story on a little known, outside of comic book folks like myself, comic book artist by the name of Fletcher Hanks, who only produced comics in 1939, 1940, and 1941. And by comics, I mean comic books. He's what we would call a golden age artist in the golden age of comics in the 30s and 40s. Because he was a very unique character. Sketches indicate that he could draw normally, but he preferred to draw in a very bizarre way, even for comics. And a Fletcher Hanks is instantly recognizable by anybody who knows anything about comics. It looks odd. For example, here. You want to describe what you're seeing there?
Yeah, it's sort of like a two-faced character, a little bit of raise it slightly, raise it 6 inches, of a woman who has like, is that a skull? Half skull,
Yeah.
half regular face. Yeah, so it's a two-faced, normal blonde woman, but half of her skull is exposed.
Right. So this is a character called Fatoma, and he had this kind of. Here's another little look.
Sort
At
of
a disembodied head saying,
saying "Have mercy," while sort of grimacing but flying through the air.
Yes.
Okay.
When he's done, he was a weird dude. But when I started really looking into it and refreshing my memory on Fletcher Hanks Jr., or Fletcher Hanks rather, he was basically an abusive, drunken asshole who died pretty much unloved and unmourned. This was a man who once kicked his 4-year-old child down a flight of stairs, which caused several years of developmental delay to the point where the child in a different era probably would have been labeled autistic.
Right.
This was a man who beat his wife so severely that he broke bones in her face, and she refused to go to the hospital. And he said, well, you can just let your bones knit together themselves at home. This guy was a monster. So this story isn't about him.
Okay, good. Thank God.
It's about one of his kids, one of his younger sons, who is named Fletcher Hanks Jr. And that always struck me as odd, is why don't you name your first child Junior? Because sometimes you have other relatives you have to name your kids after first.
Right.
That's why you might have a junior who's a little younger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call, both of the guys went by the nickname Christy, because the older Fletcher Hanks had a resemblance to Christy Mathewson, the great Major League Baseball pitcher from the early 1900s, right? So the story begins with a writer, an illustrator, an editor, and a comic book artist named Paul Karasik. And Paul, I hope I'm saying your name right, but he became obsessed with Fletcher Hanks a while back. And so he decided to look into Fletcher Hanks's work, and he figured out that he only was active for 3 years, 39, 40, and 41. But then records start to appear of a Fletcher Hanks who served as a pilot in World War II. So he tracks this Fletcher Hanks down, only to discover that the Hanks that he's found isn't the artist in question, but the artist's son. And not only did the father not serve in World War II, the younger Hanks doesn't know much about what his dad did during World War II. And he said, yeah, I don't even know much about my dad's comic book work. It all looked like crap to me. And he has some bird studies left. And Paul Karasik is very disappointed because he was hoping that he had some original art of Fletcher Hanks is there.
Right.
But when he discovers this Fletcher Hanks Jr., that's where the real story begins, because he learns that this guy was a pilot in World War II, and he worked for the CNAC, the Chinese National Aeronautics Corporation, Aviation Corporation. The CNAC, which got supplies over the hump in World War II to Stillwell in China. So Fletcher Hanks Jr., he suffered from rickets as a child. He almost died of diphtheria. He went to Lehigh University and into various business enterprises. And he admits that he tried to avoid World War II, but what he had hated what the Japanese Imperial Army had done to China, like Nanking and the stuff we talked about a couple episodes ago.
Right, sure. Yeah.
So he became a pilot, a commercial pilot with Pan Am, and then he moved on and got a job with the CNAC and became a pilot. So he started flying missions over the hump. And if you haven't listened to the first two parts of this, go back and listen to CBI parts 1 and 2. The hump was a stretch of the Himalayas from Burma and India over the hump into China. A very, very difficult run to make. He saw a lot of stuff. He saw a C-87 get blown out of the sky once by a Japanese fighter, and he could do nothing to help because he's flying a C-46. These guys had to use extreme evasion and illusion techniques, like stalling out to let the guy shoot past you if he's got you in his sights, and then try to avoid him. from 43 to 45, Fletcher Hanks Jr., Christy, flew 347 missions over the hump.
Crap.
That's one every other day.
I was about to say that's one every other day.
Okay. And they had to fly at night so they wouldn't get shot down. And if there was a thunderstorm, that was the best time to fly. So they would fly because you would have less chance of getting shot down by the Japanese fighters.
Yeah, couldn't be found, right?
So these guys, he once described it, one of the pilots described it as, the first thing you did was tighten yourself down as much as you could in your seat with your belts, because if you didn't, you'd be bouncing all over the cabin. And he said, imagine the worst commercial air flight you've ever taken, where you hit air pockets. He said, that for us, if we've been bounced around with air pockets, like if you've ever flown cross country, New York to LA, been on a 5-hour flight and you're just up and down the whole time, that was a great run for us. That was awesome because, okay, we're going to make it. This was a 1,000-mile flight, by the way, to do this.
Every time?
Every time. Yep. 1,000 miles. Yep. He lost a ton of friends on this run over the years. And once one of the ops managers asked him, they said, hey, Christy, do you ever cry when a friend dies doing this hump run? And he said, quote, I had a lifetime of crying as a child, and now there was no time to cry. There will never be a bad day in my life from now on. So, in flying over the hump, I'm going to tell you a little story and get away from Christy for a moment and tell you about a guy named Eric Severeid. Is that name familiar to you?
Yes, but I don't know why.
Because he was one of the earliest and biggest reporters for CBS during the war. He was one of Edward R. Murrow's Murrow boys. He worked with Murrow in London during the Blitz. Now, he had a trip over the hump in August of 43, the same year that Christy started flying. I'm going to read a quote here from an excellent book called The Murrow Boys, which is written by, let me look this up real quick, Stanley Cloud and Lynn Olson from 1996. And this just gives you a flavor of what these guys faced. On August 2nd, Severeid found himself on a dusty airfield in a remote corner of northeast India, staring at a small twin-engine cargo plane. That would be the C-46. He, along with 16 other passengers and 4 crew members, were to fly the perilous hump over Burma and the towering Himalayas into China. When Severeid had persuaded CBS to approve and pay for his trip to China, he had not much considered how he was going to get there. Now, looking at the C-46 shimmering in the relentless heat, he was thinking hard. Since his arrival in India, he had heard terrifying stories about the flying conditions and the loss of planes on the hump run, which sometimes conquered even solidly built planes. What it could do to a C-46, whose nickname, which I haven't mentioned yet, the nickname for the C-46 that Christy
Bone
and other
Crusher.
guys,
No, but
the Flying Coffin, close. It was called the Flying Coffin.
Right.
A plane that by most means was unsafe in any conditions. I mean, that sounds like a Ralph Nader book, right? A plane that was unsafe in any condition. Now, his plane took off uneventfully. And the going was easy at first, and Severeid started to relax. But about an hour into the flight, a young corporal leaned over and shouted to him over the noise of the plane. And I'm just imagine being on a plane and hearing this. Hey, you know what? You know what? What is followed by you know what? That guy over there is giving away free beer. My cousin can get us into the Dodgers game for free. Here's what Severeid heard. Hey, you know what? Left engine's gone out. So Severeid and the other guys on the plane had to bail out somewhere over Burma. 19 of the guys in there survived. The co-pilot did not. They had to bail out and they had to trek through the Burmese jungle to find other allies, and they were befriended by a local group of natives who saved them. Severeid people never let this down. It's the intrepid parachutist. But that was the kind of thing that could happen. And that wasn't getting hit by a fighter jet. That was just your engine going out.
Right.
So that's what these guys were facing. If you want to read more about that, I highly recommend that Murrow's boys book, because Severeid's story is pretty great about what he had to go through. So Christy survives this 3 years of 340 or 2 years and 347 missions flying over the hump. And towards the end, he knew that there was an area in 44 that plane 53 for the CNAC went down. He had some friends on it. So he did a quick recon over to this area to see if he could find the plane, the downed plane.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't see much. He kind of knew where it was, but he couldn't figure things out. That was his first retrieval mission. So after the war, he goes into business, gets married a couple times, has kids, goes on with his life, decides not to fly as a professional pilot anymore because commercial airlines are boring compared to flying over the hump. He opens up a seafood packing plant. He does real well for himself and builds this pretty incredible life. So in 1997, when he is 80 years old, he says, you know what I should do? I should go back to Burma and hike through the jungles and forge the rivers to see if I can find any of those planes.
Right.
So in 1997, at the age of 80, and 2003 at the age of 86, he does this. He goes over to Burma and treks through the jungle to try to find planes. He found several non-CNAC planes, but eventually he finds what he's looking for. He finds parts of plane 53. A huge wing is pretty much intact, one of the wings. He finds a whole bunch of it. This involved hiking and foraging rivers over many, many miles when he was 80 and 86 years old.
Right.
These parts are now displayed, I believe, in Kunming, one of the cities that they help get supplies to. That's pretty incredible. That he lived this life and said, yeah, it's still not enough. I need to go back and find some of my buddies and find what's left of their plane.
Right.
So as a coda, when Karasik left Fletcher Hanks Jr.'s home after interviewing him, Hanks pointed down to one of the comics that Karasik had brought with him to show him what his dad's artwork looked like. And Fletcher Hanks Jr., Christie, pointed to one of the books and said, that's my father. And Karasik at first didn't understand. He's like, yeah, this is the comic that your father drew. And he says, no, I know that. And he pointed to a particular face in one of the panels. And he put his finger on it. He said, that's my old man. That's him. He had drawn himself into one of his own comics.
Oh, wow.
His son recognized that. And this isn't uncommon. I mean, Norman Rockwell has a famous painting of him painting himself. And in the comic book world, right. And in the comic book world, I think I showed you this, Steve Ditko, creator of Spider-Man, based Peter Parker's look on himself. The round glasses, the original Peter Parker look. So this wasn't uncommon. But as to bring it all around, the child who'd been kicked down the stairs decades before, the one who would have been labeled autistic, that was in fact Christie. That was Fletcher Hanks Jr. that was treated that way. For 5 years, he didn't talk. Everybody thought he was developmentally delayed. And this man went on to truly live up to the Greek saying, be a better man than your father.
Yeah, absolutely.
Getting supplies to Stillwell over the hump in horrible conditions, and then going back again to find everything. Fletcher Hanks Jr., Christie, died in 2008 at the age of 90 or 91. Sources for this piece. Oh, I'm sorry. CNAC artifacts are on display at 4 places I could find: the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, the San Diego Aerospace Museum, the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. and Chantilly, Virginia, and at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. So if you're ever in that area and you're interested in this, go check out those displays. The sources for this were the complete works of Fletcher Hanks, which is subtitled Turn Loose Our Death Rays and Kill Them All, from 2016, edited by Paul Karasik. The Afterword from Above, a 10-page, I believe, a comic called Whatever Happened to Fletcher Hanks, written and illustrated by Paul Karasik. The Murrow Boys, Pioneers on the Front Lines of Broadcast Journalism by Stanley Cloud, Lynn Olson from 96. An excellent article in the Lehigh Alumni Bulletin from spring of 2004 called The Pull of Memory by Bruce Pringle. A Baltimore Sun article from October of 2003 written by Chris Guy called Back to Burma. CNAC.org and Wikipedia for basic dates. And that wraps up both the story of Fletcher Hanks Jr. and our little 3-parter on the China-Burma-India Theater of World War II.
Nice. Very, very cool. It occurs to me now, I think the reason that story rang a bell a little bit, I think I watched part of a documentary on, there's a National Geographic or there's something where they're trekking through just the most crazy, ridiculous, dense jungle, looking for these things. And they have some, I mean, as I recall, some locals in the area that are helping. And I mean, like one of the pieces of wreckage, a big piece of wreckage, they had walked right past like 5 times. within like feet of it, but couldn't see it because it was just so completely overgrown.
Right.
I'm convinced that that's this story. They went back
No,
finding,
you're
oh my god, this is it. Yeah, and they found this huge hunk of fuselage or whatever.
Yeah, they found a big part of the fuselage, and they found an intact wing. And I forgot to mention that, but yes, they used a lot of the native groups there to help find these pieces
Right.
and get them out. Yeah, and drag, because once you find them, you got to get them out of there. So that in itself is a project.
Yeah.
But looking back on this 3-parter, we talk about the Greatest Generation and what it was like to fight in World War II, and I don't think you and I can even imagine the horrors of what some of these guys saw, be it Guadalcanal or the forests of Europe, or in this case, the China-Burma-India Theater. But it took a special kind of person to do what these guys did, what the Fletcher Hanks Juniors, the Weary Dunlop, and the guy we started with, Joseph Stilwell. But all of that came out of my interest in Fletcher Hanks comics, is where this whole 3-parter came from, because I was like, I really want to write about Fletcher Hanks.
You started Googling and you went down a rabbit hole, it sounds like.
Well, I knew I was going to do a story on Weary Dunlop, and I was like, oh, these guys were both in the same theater of war. I might as well tack a bit about Joseph Stilwell on the front, and 3-parter. So there we go. The China-Burma-India Theater of World War II.
And with Hanks especially, I mean, that's just the expression "underestimate me at your peril" comes to mind. I mean, talk about someone right.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, just the fact that when he went over there, he'd been flying planes for a couple of years, and he's taken this trek and he's doing these things where they're flying to unbelievable altitudes and evading fighter pilots and just all this crazy shit, where you're like, how did you do that? And furthermore, how did you go back when you should have been resting and watching baseball games on TV? Remarkable people in a remarkable time in a remarkable place. So next week, I'm going to do something really lighthearted, which I think we'll need after this 2-parter and our earlier discussion.
So is mine, folks. So if you're thinking Dream Idiots is less idiotic and more dreary and black, we'll get back to this to the idiotic content here real soon.
Yeah, silliness will abound in my story next week. So
yes. Okay.
All right. Anything else? Are we good?
I think that's it. Thanks for listening, folks. Like and subscribe and do all those things. DreamIdiots.com. Email us if you have any comments or questions or insults. DreamIdiotspodcast@gmail.com. And we're going to be back again.
Thanks.
Bye.